Welcome to the Jackson Rudolph podcast. I'm your host, Jackson Rudolph, and we are back for episode 95, brought to you by the one and only, the legendary Black Belt Magazine. And I have to apologize, y'all. I recognize that we've got a little bit of a lighting situation going on. It's a little dark. I think it's because it's springtime, and at the time that I'm doing the podcast, we still got light outside here in Washington, D.C. So I have to change my lighting setup for some future episodes, but we'll make it work for today. And today we have a very exciting episode. As you can see, it's just me, and we are recapping the 40th anniversary of the Ocean State Grand Nationals. Just happened this past weekend. So much action. We're going to be talking about a ton of it today. And since it's just me on the show, make sure you guys are participating. Chime in the comments. Let me know who's watching. Give me a wave. Give me a what's up. And if you've got any questions or any thoughts based on what happened this weekend at the Ocean State Grand Nationals, definitely drop those down in the comments below. If you don't watch much sport karate and the Jackson Rudolph podcast is your first exposure to sport karate, I highly recommend after this live stream going back and watching 2 episodes ago. We did a film study of the Ocean State Grand Nationals over the years. Watched a lot of great performances from this event, as this was the 40th anniversary of the event, which is a huge accomplishment. And for those of you that have been tuning in for all of season 3 of the Jackson Rudolph podcast, you know that we break the show up into segments now. And I'm going to go ahead and start that bottom line scrolling across for our opening segment, which is This Week in Sport Karate. Really 3 big things that I wanted to highlight as the sport karate news this week, which you can now see in the bottom line scrolling across here. Number 1, the big news originally reported by the Martial Arts Internetwork and Travis Plowden is that Team Impex and Team KTOC have announced a merger. Obviously, Richard Plowden's going to be involved in the fighting side of Team KTOC now. We don't know all the details of how everything is going to work out administratively. We don't know completely what all players are going to be representing that team. We did see a logo get leaked. I believe it was in a Richard Plowden Facebook post down in the comments. He threw what the logo was going to look like down in there. So congratulations to those entities on putting together a really strong squad with the existing players from Impex and KTOC. And I'm excited to see that. Anytime you get, a lot of movement in the sport karate team world, that's always really exciting and really refreshing to see. And I wish them the best in that endeavor. But that was huge news that came out. Once again, credit to Martial Arts Internetwork for originally reporting that. Number 2, another big kind of team news here is that Team CBR, standing for Christine Bannon Rodriguez, powered by the Ocean State Collision Center, so a regional sponsorship for a national team. Team CBR, they made their debut, their official debut, at the Ocean State Grand Nationals. We saw a few of their players in uniform at the Compete Internationals, but at the Ocean State Grand Nationals, that was their official debut. And Christine Bannon Rodriguez has put together a great squad, and it's awesome to see that new team get formed with obviously a great coach and one of the greatest female sport karate competitors of all time. That's fighting and forms and weapons. So shout out to Team CBR. And speaking of Christine Bannon Rodriguez, we're going to bring her husband, Coach Don Rodriguez, into this as well as the promoters of the Ocean State Grand Nationals, because big news this week is that they brought out over $20,000 in prize money. Now, for those of you that are part of our Black Belt Magazine audience that are maybe MMA fans and you hear about some of the purses for MMA and all that stuff, sport karate is a much smaller sport right now. We're working on growing it and developing it. That's why we have things like this podcast to try to spread sport karate to more and more people, because it truly is an amazing spectator sport, and any martial artist can appreciate the speed and athleticism that is needed in the point fighting divisions, as well as the precision and technique that is needed in the forms and weapons divisions. And we're really trying to help spread sport karate, and Black Belt Magazine has done an excellent job of helping us on that mission. So $20,000 may not sound like a whole lot of money to somebody that's from the outside looking in, but within the sport karate community, that is a very big deal, and it is a huge step in the right direction, especially when you consider the fact that they put together these super fights and super forms divisions specifically to be able to offer athletes that much more money. So the current NASCA limitation on prize money is $500 for an overall grand championship. And Don and Christine Rodriguez got together and said, hey, we're going to do a totally separate division. We're going to do a super fights division, and we're going to pay the winner $3,000, 6 times the winnings of a NASCA overall grand championship. The winner of the super fights got $3,000. That is awesome. So, hey, round of applause. Everybody tuning in. Drop those comments. Drop those likes. Round of applause for Don and Christine Rodriguez for bringing out the big bucks in the sport karate world at the Ocean State Grand Nationals. I applaud you for that. The athletes applaud you for that. That's awesome. There's nothing more I can say about it other than how awesome that is. So that is some of the best news coming out of sport karate this week, is that there are promoters who are actively trying to increase that prize money to keep competitors coming back and to help making our sport look more and more professional so that we can spread it to all the people that we know would love enjoying some sport karate action. And that will do it for this week in sport karate, which is going to bring us to our kind of main feature part of this episode, which is going to be a top 10 countdown of my favorite point fighting performances over the course of the weekend. Now, before we do that, you're probably thinking, Jackson, you're a forms and weapons guy. Why aren't you talking about forms and weapons? I'm going to start by talking about forms and weapons as the honorable mentions, right? But what I realized, because my first draft of this show was to do a full breakdown list of all of the top performances that I saw at the Ocean State Grand Nationals, right? And then as I was making the list, I realized, well, my fiance won an overall grand championship, and a lot of my Team Paul Mitchell teammates did really well. And so if I make the whole show about this, it's going to sound like I'm just, representing my people the whole time. So I am going to abbreviate the forms and weapons part of the show and shout out those people who deserve it. And then we're going to move on into the point fighting part of today's show, which is a much less biased affair, right? So I'm going to start by just naming out some of the facts. I got it on my phone because so much stuff happened. I didn't want to leave any of it out. First and foremost, I want to give a big congratulations to Gabrielle Dunn, soon to be Miss Gabrielle Rudolph, for winning the women's forms overall grand championship. That was a long time coming for her. She was super excited to win that, so I had to give her a shout out here at the top of the show. Now we're going to move into some of the Team Paul Mitchell members and how they performed. The two biggest winners, Isabella Nicoli and Esteban Tremblay. So Bella pulled off a nearly unprecedented feat and won all 4 of the 13 under girls divisional grand championships. So every girl 13 and under at the tournament in traditional weapons, traditional forms or kata, CMX weapons, creative musical extreme that is, CMX weapons and CMX forms, Bella Nicoli beat them all. Like completely beat everybody en route to getting on stage, where because she beat everybody else, she just did 2 demonstrations for the crowd and took home both of her overall grand championships. That was a dominant performance. Esteban Tremblay was almost just as dominant in the 14 to 17 division. He won the CMX Forms Divisional Grand Championship, CMX Weapons, Traditional Weapons. He would go on to compete against Shane Billow, who's been very hot recently. So got to tip my cap to Shane Billow as well for winning the Traditional Forms Divisional Grand Championship in that division. But Esteban Tremblay wound up winning the overall in both forms and weapons in his debut for Team Paul Mitchell. Of course, it was Bella Nicoli's debut for Team Paul Mitchell as well. So big shout out to those 2 big winners. We're going to move a little bit more quickly through some of the others. So those are some of the juniors. We look at the seniors. Samuel Diaz III, one of our newest Paul Mitchell members, he won the Senior Men's Weapons Grand Championship in a great battle of commas between himself doing traditional, Edgar Cordova of Team Revolution with the flying commas, and his Team Revolution teammate Kevin Kowalczyk with his regular extreme comma form. That was a great division to see those 3 guys go at it. And Team Paul Mitchell, Sam Diaz came out on top. And then we had the return of one of the GOATs in the women's senior category. Casey Marks Nash came back, winning the women's forms and weapons senior grand championships. That was awesome to see. I was sitting there ringside to watch both of those grand championship runs, because if you're at a tournament and Casey Marks Nash is competing, you can't miss it. Like that is something that you cannot miss at a sport karate tournament. So big shout out to those seniors for getting some wins. Then our super forms winners, we had Haley Glass winning super forms on the women's side and Jake Presley winning super forms on the men's side in an epic battle with Rashad Eugene. That was a ton of fun to watch. So big shout out to them. They also grabbed a couple of overall grand championships of their own. Jake winning the traditional weapons overall grand championship on the men's side, and then Haley winning the CMX weapons just the overall weapons. They don't split it on the women's side, but the overall weapons grand championship for the women was Haley Glass. So congratulations to them for those accomplishments. Ben Jones and Sammy Smith, another couple of Paul Mitchell members. They looked very sharp this weekend, so it was awesome getting to watch them. We also have Avery Presley winning an overall grand championship in the 14 to 17 girls weapons category. And I want to talk about Avery specifically because of the last move of her form. She's doing this move now where she throws the bow, throws it like back behind her. There's no way she can see it. She looks straight forward at the judges and just reaches back and grabs it with both hands and goes right into a swing. Very cool, very creative, and a lot of difficulty to take that level of risk, to do a release, not even look at it, just trust your timing and your precision to be able to make that catch at the end of the form when the adrenaline is at its highest. I got to tip my cap to Avery Presley on that one. That was a really cool move. I did not see that coming. So congratulations, Avery Presley, for winning that overall grand championship. Very well deserved. Another person making her Paul Mitchell debut. Speaking of Paul Mitchell debuts, we also had Dawson Holt winning the men's CMX forms category. Dawson looked awesome all weekend. Have to give him a shout out. Alex Mancias won his back-to-back CMX weapons overall grand championship. He won it at the Compete Internationals, came back at Ocean States, won it again with his comma routine. So Alex, congratulations to you, my man. We're almost at the end here. And again, I'm getting rid of my bias here early in the show. I got to give a shout out to Team Competitive Edge. The whole squad looked great this weekend, but I got to give a shout out to our two newest members. Wasim Driddy won double overall grand championships. So that is 3 athletes, Esteban Tremblay, Bella Nicoli, and Wasim Driddy, all winning double overall grand championships at the Ocean State Grand Nationals. I can't remember the last time that happened. That is absolutely crazy. And then Competitive Edge's other new addition, Philip Brumet, looking awesome all weekend. Saw several of his weapons forms. He was looking great. And then in the runoffs, almost pulling out a win with a creative form, which is very difficult to do in the forms division. And that was insane. He had a double illusion kick where he kind of landed to the ground as he did a back sweep to make it a legal double illusion kick within those creative forms rules. I thought that was a really unique way to kind of manipulate the rules there and do something that had a really high level of difficulty. And that's truly what the spirit of the creative division is finding new ways to do things that fit within the limits of the rules, but also upgrade the difficulty and execution of the performance. So I thought Philip Brumet did a fantastic job with that. And with that is going to conclude my forms and weapons talk. That gets all my Team Paul Mitchell guys, my 2 new Competitive Edge members, my fiance. I got that out of the way early in the show here, right? So now we're going to center ourselves a bit, and we're going to transition to talking about the top 10 point fighting performances that I saw this weekend at the Ocean State Grand Nationals. Go ahead, drop some of your list down below. Who were some of the top fighters that you saw in action at the Ocean States? And by the end of the episode, we're actually going to do a little bit of a film study of a couple of those fights, courtesy of Point Fighter Live, their Facebook page. They did a great job covering the event. And so we're going to use their stream to kind of look at a couple of the fights here. So huge shout out to Alex Reyes and the guys over at Point Fighter Live. But without further ado, we're going to get into this top 10 countdown. I say without further ado, I got to throw in some honorable mentions first because there were so many top fighters that flocked to the Ocean State Grand Nationals because of this great prize money that the promoters were putting out, that you could go 10 deep and you still don't cover all the great fighters that were there. There were literally probably 20 to 25 world-class fighters. And the divisions extended to like 40 competitors in the open weight and in the super fights division. It was insane. So getting to see that level of high-level participation at the event, that was truly special. It was a lot of fun to watch. And so I am going to give a few honorable mentions for people that did not quite make my top 10, but for guys that I thought fought really, really well. Alex Mancias, who I already mentioned on the forms and weapons side, he had some losses this weekend in point fighting, but I thought he fought well. He fought as well as I've seen him fight in a long time. Had a really close match with D-Stacks, Darren Payne. Thought he fought Darren very, very well up until the very end where Darren was able to pull away, and that's because Darren's a world-class fighter. You're going to hear his name in the top 10. So shout out to Alex Mancias. I thought Tyreek Saint fought very well. I was impressed by him. His speed is incredible. And then the Walkers of Team All-Stars, I thought both of them fought really well. Kevin Walker making it to the final 4 of the super fights. That was an impressive performance from him. And then Chris Walker in the senior division And coming down into the 1829s fighting there as well. I thought Chris fought pretty well throughout the entire weekend. I wasn't able to see all of his fights, but I was able to see a handful of them. And I thought Chris did a great job. So shout out to Chris Walker, one of the hosts of the CTE podcast over on Martial Arts Internetwork. So make sure after you guys are done here, go give them a follow as well. And, that's how it is over here in the sport karate media community. We're always giving each other shout outs. Point Fighter Live, Martial Arts Center Network, sportmartialarts.com. We all lift each other up. We all help each other be better. And that will officially do it for all my honorable mentions, all the extra stuff. If you guys are tuning in, make sure you drop your name down in the comments. Let me know who's watching, because now we are getting to the top 10 point fighting performances that I saw at the Ocean State Grand Nationals. I'm going to switch over to my banners here. I'm going to get rid of my Ocean State recap banner. And we're going to start with number 10, D-Stacks. Darren Payne, the guy I was just talking about. And you guys are probably thinking, whoa, 10, right? So this is purely about the fights that I saw at the Ocean State Grand Nationals. Of course, Darren Payne would be higher than 10 right now, being the Warrior Cup champion and all the great fights that he's had over the last few months. I'm just talking about at the Ocean State Grand Nationals. And I'm going to give a little justification for each of these. I got my notes ready. We're going to break these things down, right? So at number 10, I went with D-Stacks. And reading off my notes here, he had an impressive streak through the super fights division, beat Coca Guzman, Paulo Serafico, Tyreek Saint, all back-to-back in super fights. Those are three formidable opponents that he was able to take out. But it just turned out that this weekend he wasn't able to get those big wins, the overall grand championship, the super fights title. In each of those moments, he just came up a little bit short, but that doesn't take anything away from how great of a fighter he is. I remember I was watching one of the divisions. I was sitting next to Steve Babcock, one of the Paul Mitchell executives, and we were just watching him fight and just talking about, man, how smooth is his game. He moves so effortlessly. He's so quick. His reach is incredible. D-Stacks is just such a skilled fighter. And I was talking to him on Instagram the other day, and I just told him it's so fun to watch him fight. His execution, his technique, the smoothness of his game. There's so many similarities to like Cam Dawson's game that we see in D-Stacks, but he also has his own flair about it. He has his own way of fighting that makes it his own. So again, I could talk about D-Stacks all day because I love watching that man fight. But he's number 10 in the countdown as far as the performances that I saw at the Ocean State Grand Nationals. That brings me to number 9, Enrique Latona, making it to the final 4 of the super fights and then advancing to the finals of the super fights. So that's what kind of gave him a little leg up on Darren in terms of performance at the Ocean States, was that Enrique would advance to the final to face Avery Plowden. I thought Enrique fought pretty well all weekend. Everybody knows that Enrique is a great kicker. I'm going to pull up some of my notes here to make sure that I'm not leaving anything out. On his route to the super fights final, he had to beat both Kevin Walker and Jack Felton. Anytime that you beat Jack Felton, that means that you probably had a pretty good weekend, because as I've said on the show many times, Jack Felton is an all-time great point fighter. And so Enrique being able to get a win over him is a big deal in that super fights division. And in general, Enrique's just a great fighter. I like watching Enrique fight. He's got great kicking ability, and he's still growing and developing, right? He's one of those guys that's going to continue to get better and better over the next few years for Top 10 Team USA. So shout out to Enrique Latona. He comes in at number 9 on the countdown of these point fighting performances. And now we move on to number 8. After number 8, I'm going to take a look at the comments, see what people are saying and thinking. But for number 8, we got Brandon Ballou of Team Straight Up. Anybody that watches the show knows that I am a huge Brandon Ballou fan. He first gained my respect when he was in the junior division with his wicked bow form. He had a style like Joey Greenhall's, but he added some speed to it. He had his own tricks that he had. And I competed against him for years. We were in the juniors. And then when we went up to the adult division, I stayed a weapons competitor and he moved on and became a fighter. But that's when he gained my respect. And then, I just love watching him fight. He's a very tough, gritty fighting style. And the reason he comes in at number 8, he actually beat Darren Payne. He beat D-Stacks in their division. I forget if it was like their divisional grand or if it was just in that division or what have you. But it was on the heavyweight side of things in those divisions. Brandon actually wound up beating D-Stacks. If you beat the Warrior Cup champion, that's a pretty big deal. That's going to get you noticed. So that was cool to see. That was a great fight between the two of them, a back and forth match that Brandon was able to come out on top of. And then Brandon advanced to the next round where he fought Elijah Everel and gave Elijah a great fight. There's not many guys that can give Elijah Everel a close fight. Brandon gave him a great fight. I think he even had a little bit of a lead on Elijah at one point in that match. And so just seeing Brandon perform at such a high level. He was also part of a hybrid team fight that featured Luis Nunez and Avery Plowden. They kind of joined forces and went through the team division, made it all the way to the finals where they lost to the All-Stars, which was Kevin Walker, Elijah Everel, and Jack Felton. So no shame in losing to that team, right? But to see Brandon's performance over the weekend and how well he did across all of his fights, had to give him a shout out here at number 8. So there's our first 3 in the countdown. We got D-Stacks, Enrique Latona, Brandon Ballou. Let me know what you guys are thinking about that. I'm going to switch over to the comments. Doesn't look like we got anybody giving their hot takes yet, but there's my first 3 of the top 10 here, and we're going to go ahead and keep rolling. And coming in at number 7 on the countdown, we're going to represent the ladies a little bit. We have Tahira Abdul Qadir of Top 10 Team USA coming in at number 7. I was really impressed with Tahira this weekend. She advanced all the way to the finals of the women's point fighting, where she suffered a loss to the ultra-dominant Morgan Plowden, right? Again, just like there's no shame in losing to the All-Stars, there's no shame in losing to Morgan Plowden. She's that good. And even though the ultimate result of that final fight wound up being a spread, I think it was 11-1, and Morgan took the overall grand championship. But we were talking about this in the booth because I was commentating for the CW network along with Mike Petracca, who did a great job. He's not a sport karate guy, but he was just kind of doing some color commentary with some sports commentary experience, and it created some really good synergy in the booth where he was kind of asking questions about sport karate, and I was able to give some context. But anyway, we were talking in the booth about even though that fight wound up being a spread, it didn't feel like a spread. Like Tahira was not completely outclassed by Morgan Plowden like the vast majority of female fighters wind up being, right? She looked like she was capable of standing in there with Morgan Plowden, right? So the score did not reflect how that fight really went. Yes, Morgan was dominant and Morgan deserved that win 100%, but it didn't feel like Tahira was that far off. It was clear that Tahira was in that league, that she is one of the top female fighters right now. And even though you may not be Morgan Plowden, which is out of the frame up here, you're still one of those top high-level fighters. It would be really interesting to see a matchup between like a Tahira and a Kitana Everett. Kitana, who's been able to get some wins over Morgan Plowden in the past, and see how those two stack up. Maybe that's a future fight that we can make in the virtual fight tour. Jesse Ray, if you're tuning in, maybe Tahira Abdul Qadir and Kitana Everett. I'd watch that fight. I think that'd be a great match, but I digress. But in general, Tahira Abdul Qadir was really impressive. She also, in the lightweight grand championship for the women, she defeated Cassandra de la Barrera, who was the overall grand champion from the Compete Internationals. So the last tournament we had was the Competes. Cassandra was the winner of that whole thing. And then for Tahira to take her out of this event, that means that Tahira is pretty good. By the way, I didn't mention, this was Tahira's adult debut on NASCA. That's a big deal. And your adult debut to make it all the way to the finals and face Morgan Plowden and then look good against Morgan Plowden, that is respectable. So that's why Tahira Abdul Qadir comes in at number 7 on my countdown. Had to give her a shout out because she really impressed me this weekend. Now we move on to number 6, and we've got teammate of D-Stacks. Next level, we got Tyson Ray. So Tyson Ray, I'm going to reference my notes here because I got kind of the main reasons that everybody kind of fell where they did. And Tyson's is pretty easy. He beat Elijah Everel in the open weight, right? So Elijah Everel was somebody that coming into the Ocean State Grand Nationals was the number 1 lightweight point fighter in the world, ranked by Black Belt Magazine. He switched over to the heavyweight side of things at the Ocean State, so that's kind of mixed up the rankings a little bit. But Elijah Everel, one of the best fighters in the world. Nobody's going to question that. And so anytime that he gets beat, that's a big deal. And Tyson Ray was able to pull that off in the open weight division. And other than that, Tyson Ray is just Tyson Ray, right? He's a very exciting, entertaining fighter. For him to be as young as he is, toughness like Darren Payne. I mean, for both of them to be as young as they are and to perform at the level that they perform at is absolutely incredible. It's always a pleasure to watch them. And Tyson Ray being able to get that win over Elijah is what elevates him all the way up into this number 6 spot, in addition to the fact that, in general, I'm always impressed by Tyson Ray. I'm a big Tyson Ray fan. And that does it for the first 5 of our top 10 countdown. So we got D Stacks, Enrique Latona. These are world-class fighters coming off the board already. Brandon Ballou, Tahira Abdul Qadir, Tyson Ray. It was a stacked division. When those are the bottom 5 of the top 10, you know that you got some heat coming up in the top 5. So now we're going to go ahead and jump into the top 5 of this countdown. And coming in at number 5, representing the senior division, we've got Yoskar Gomez of Team Legend. He was dominant on the senior side of things this weekend, winning both the 30-plus overall grand championship for point fighting and the 40-plus overall grand championship for point fighting. He didn't care what age group you were in. He was going to compete down. He was going to come in and fight everybody. And he fought great throughout. I sat there and watched because I was waiting on Casey Marks-Nash to do her grand championships. And so I got to watch some of those senior fighting grands. And Yoskar was literally jumping back and forth between the 2 rings, 30-plus on one side, 40-plus on the other side, jumping back and forth. Let me advance to the next round in this division. Now let me switch over to the other division, advance to the next round in that one. Let me go win this grand championship. Okay, let me catch my breath, go win this grand championship. It was really, really impressive to see him maintain that kind of endurance and take out some high-level fighters along the way. I mean, there were great senior fighters there. He fought against El Jabba Abdul Qadir, had a fight against Chris Walker. Chris Walker, he was in my honorable mentions. Chris fought Yoskar very well. I thought that Chris looked really good against Yoskar, but at the end of the day, Yoskar scored when it mattered most and was able to take that win. But have to give a huge shout out to Yoskar Gomez. And I think that that senior fighting division is often far too underrated in sport karate competition right now. We've been given a lot of love to senior forms and weapons because that division is so deep right now. Edgar Cordova, Eric Tremblay, Samuel Diaz, Kevin Kowalczyk. I know that I'm going to forget people if I try to name everybody, so I'm just going to stop right there. But that division is extremely deep. But in the fighting division, senior fighting is really deep right now as well. And that's not even counting some of the people that weren't in action at the Ocean Stakes. You got guys like Jeremy Roquet, who fights great when he fights in that senior division. But nonetheless, Yoskar Gomez, when you're winning 2 different overall grand championships in 2 different age categories, you're going to find yourself in the top 10 countdown. Now, moving into the top 4, this is where things get really interesting, right? Coming in at number 4 in the countdown, top 10 performances, point fighting performances that I saw at the Ocean State Grand Nationals. We've got Jack, the Iceman, Felton. Again, if you watch this show, you know I love me some Jack Felton. So Jack Felton comes in at number 4 on this countdown as the open weight winner. That makes back-to-back open weight titles for him, winning at the Compete Internationals and then now at the Ocean State Grand Nationals. If I'm not mistaken, going off the top of my head from the Black Belt Magazine rankings update, that catapults Jack up to the number 1 open weight point fighter in the world right now for getting those wins back-to-back and beating really tough competition along the way to do so. So congratulations to Jack Felton on that accomplishment. And, I mean, what more can you say about Jack Felton? I mean, he's a Black Belt Magazine Hall of Famer. I will give a little bit of behind the scenes from the commentary that we were doing watching him fight on stage. You know, I never realized just how lethal Jack's left hand was. And it's because I watch Jack all the time. So I'm like, it's almost like I'm desensitized to how good Jack is. But when I was commentating with Mike Petrarca, he was like, man, this guy is scoring his left hand whenever he wants to. And then I started thinking about it. I started watching the fights that Jack was going through, and I was like, you know what? He's landing that left hand almost every time that he throws it. And that's Jack Felton, right? I mean, his fundamentals are so good. His timing is so good. And I mean, those of you that are sport karate fans, you don't need to listen to me tell you how good Jack Felton is because you already know how good Jack Felton is if you call yourself a sport karate fan, right? So number 4 on the countdown, we got Jack Felton. Number 3, and this is where things got so difficult in the top 3. We've got Richard Avery, Plowden, and his performance at the Ocean States coming in at number 3. And it was really, really close between him and Elijah Everel, who I'm going to go ahead and spoil, came in at number 2. And at the end of the day, what it came down to was Avery won in the super fights when they fought against each other. Avery would go on to win the entire super fights division. Huge deal, biggest singular prize money at the event. Elijah was able to get the upper hand on Avery in the heavyweight overall grand championship. And then in the team division, when it came down to a matchup between Elijah and Avery, Elijah was able to get the win there as well. So in their individual matchups, they were 2-1, with Elijah winning 2 and Avery winning 1. And that's what gave Elijah the edge to move him up to number 2 on this countdown and have Avery Plowden at number 3. But watching those two guys, I hope that Elijah keeps coming over to the States. I hope that maybe Avery goes and fights over in Europe some, so that we get more matchups between those two, because every single matchup they had was exciting. It was back and forth. We're going to do a film study of one of their fights from the night show coming up here at the end of the show. But watching those two fight was just so special to see the fight IQ that is shared between the two of them, the way that they felt each other out, working the fakes, Elijah with his blitz, Avery with the counter back fist, the defensive side kicks. I mean, watching those two go at it was such an interesting chess match to watch two masters of their craft duke it out against each other multiple times over the course of the weekend. I mean, that was so special to watch. And I got to give a shout out to Avery Plowden for going all the way and winning that super fights. That was a huge division with the most pressure of any division all weekend to go and get that super fights title. That was the most coveted title at the event, and Avery Plowden went and got it. And because of those head-to-head duels that those two had, we see in the heavyweight rankings for Black Belt Magazine, Elijah and Avery are knotted at number 1. It's literally going to come down to who can go win next. In individual competition, they were 1-1 on the weekend. Who can go win next? Which one of them is going to show up and make waves at the Battle of Atlanta? Whichever one of them makes some waves next and gets another major title is going to have sole possession of that number 1 spot. In all likelihood, comes down to what the committee says, but having a good pulse of kind of the way the committee makes decisions, if one of those guys gets another major title, they're going to be in sole possession of that number 1 spot. So that gives us some great storylines going into the Battle of Atlanta. Of course, Elijah living over in the United Kingdom. We never know what tournaments he's going to be able to make it to over here in the United States. We can be pretty sure that Avery Plowden's always going to show up because the guy's a workhorse and he's always out there winning overall grand championships. But that little budding rivalry between the two of them, it's a friendly rivalry because they both respect each other, but a competitive rivalry, that's going to be a lot of fun to watch for the foreseeable future, because those two guys, especially if Elijah stays up in the heavyweights instead of cutting back down to the lightweights, if Elijah stays up in the heavyweights, we're going to get a lot more matchups of those two guys, and that's going to be really special. One of the other things that I saw happen this weekend that I got to give Avery Plowden props for is in the heavyweight grand championship, so the divisional grand championship on the upper end of that heavyweight side, he went up against Brian Rodriguez, who's a great fighter, a very respected fighter, represents Team Proper nationally and Team Diamond on a regional basis. He spread him. I think it was either 10-0 or 11-1. I think it might have been 10-0. I think he might have not given up a point. Somebody please correct me if I'm wrong about that. But to see Avery just be so dominant and so in his zone, there's nothing like it. When Avery Plowden gets in that zone, there's truly nothing like it in sport karate. So if you guys haven't watched Avery Plowden fight before, stay tuned so you get to watch him fight Elijah at the end of the show here, because the battles between those guys was just great. I could go on and on about that. And I kind of spoiled what my number 2 was. Second best point fighting performance that I saw all weekend was Elijah Everel. Got a couple of titles under his belt, won the heavyweight grand championship, went on to the virtual fight tour Last Man Standing, which was against the lightweight winner, Jack Felton. Which, by the way, I should have mentioned that when Jack came in at number 4, was that he did not only win open weight, he also won the lightweight overall grand championship, which is a big deal. But anyway, so Elijah won the heavyweight grand, then went on to face Jack and won the virtual fight tour Last Man Standing. By the way, I still love virtual fight tour Last Man Standing. I hope we get that at every single NASCA event, because that's the way the overall grand used to be. It used to be the best heavyweight at the tournament against the best lightweight at the tournament. You always got the David and Goliath. It was always such an interesting matchup. and I want to see Jesse Ray bringing that to all the tournaments. Virtual Fight Tour, Last Man Standing. I am a huge stan of the Last Man Standing division. So Jesse Ray, keep that thing going, my man. And yeah, I mean, I pretty much said everything there is to say about Elijah Everel, right? Came over to the United States, and there's a difference between Elijah coming to the United States now compared to Elijah coming to the United States a few years ago when he won the overall grand at the U.S. Open. I was telling one of my students about this because we were kind of talking about the fights over the weekend. And there's a huge difference in those two events, right? Because you're like, well, Elijah won the grand championship at the U.S. Open. Now he's won the grand championship at the Ocean States. Aren't those like, you won an overall grand championship, right? Here's the difference that I'm getting at. It's one thing for a European fighter to come over to the United States and get a win when nobody really knows what to expect, right? Elijah was, I think he was probably only 18 years old when he came over for that U.S. Open and won the U.S. Open overall. An 18-year-old kid from the United Kingdom, there's not a whole lot of film that gets over to the United States so that these fighters over here can be preparing for it and know what to expect. So Elijah, in some ways, came out of nowhere, surprised everybody, and won as a European fighter at the U.S. Open. I want to say that was 2018, if I'm not mistaken. Again, if somebody knows better, please correct me in the comments on that. But fast forward. Elijah Everel has now won multiple more Waco World Championships. He was the 2020 Irish Open openweight champion. The most coveted title in all of point fighting is the Irish Open openweight. And so now, literally every point fighter in the world knows who Elijah Everel is. They know what to expect. They know how long he is. They know how fast his blitz is. They know how fast that quick front leg side kick that he throws is. They know what Elijah's best weapons are. So now, 2022, Elijah comes over to the United States. Everybody at that tournament knows what to expect from Elijah, and he still goes and wins the overall grand championship. That is huge. When you can come over as a European fighter, adapting to the NASCAR rules, adapting to the differences in NASCAR judging, adapting to the stage instead of just fighting in a ring, adapting to the very different fighting styles of the average American fighter compared to the average European fighter. All of those adjustments, to be able to do that after several years of not having competed in the United States very much, and every single person at that event knows the way that Elijah Everel fights, that is extremely impressive. That is the difference. This is not just Elijah winning another overall grand championship. I would argue that his overall grand championship here at the Ocean States in 2022 was more impressive than winning the U.S. Open, typically considered to be, the bigger, more coveted event because it's the U.S. Open, right? I would say that his win at Ocean States was a bigger deal because at U.S. Open, again, he shocked the world. People weren't ready for him. He caught people off guard, and he was able to win that way. That doesn't take anything away from his win at the U.S. Open. He beat everybody. That doesn't take anything away from his win at the U.S. Open several years ago. But what it does is it underlines how impressive the Ocean States was. Everybody knew what was coming. Everybody knew what he could do. Everybody had seen him fight American fighters when he fought at the Waco Worlds and went up against Bailey Murphy, right? So everybody knows what Elijah's got in his bag, and Elijah was still able to overcome that and get wins, right? Helped All-Stars win team fighting. Won the Virtual Fight Tour Last Man Standing, the overall grand championship. That was very impressive. And also the resiliency in that head-to-head matchup with Avery Plowden to, on Friday night, lose in the super fights, get beat in the first round of super fights by Avery Plowden. No shame in losing to Avery Plowden, but it was the first round of super fights. And then 24 hours later, to make the adjustment to come back and win the heavyweight grand and to get up on Avery so that the All-Stars could win the team fight, that is really impressive, right? So Elijah Everel, kudos to you, my man. Very impressive performance. However, a man was not the most impressive point fighter at the Ocean State Grand Nationals. The most impressive point fighter at the Ocean State Grand Nationals was Morgan Plowden. Morgan Plowden, if you look up, everybody, go find an encyclopedia, right, or a dictionary. And go keep scrolling until you find the word dominant. And next to the word dominant should be a picture of Morgan Plowden. She's that good. If you watched her at Ocean States, she was beating people handily left and right. Didn't matter who you put in front of her, whether it's open weight, divisions, older fighter, younger fighter, doesn't matter. Morgan was going to win. There was nothing that was going to stop Morgan Plowden from winning when she felt like it. I mean, Morgan always feels like winning, and so you're pretty much never going to stop Morgan Plowden, right? Very, very few fighters in the last few years have been able to prove that they can beat Morgan Plowden, right? And if they have proven that, that's a big deal. Kudos to them. I mentioned Kitana Everett earlier in the show. She's been able to do that. But even at Diamonds, when Kitana was able to get a win on Morgan in the eliminations, what happens 24 hours later? Morgan comes up on stage, takes the diamond ring again. You can slow Morgan Plowden down, maybe a little. You're not going to stop Morgan Plowden. Morgan Plowden is the most dominant female point fighter in the game right now. You can make a case that she is the most dominant point fighter, period. Male, female, doesn't matter, in the game right now. That is how good Morgan Plowden is. And it's not craziness when you see Richard, her dad, and Avery, her brother, posting goat emojis on their social media. They're not doing that just because it's the dad and it's the brother. They're doing that because they mean it, and they're doing it because there is a legitimate argument that Morgan Plowden could be the greatest female point fighter of all time. There are a lot of great female point fighters, many of whom I was teammates with. Chelsea Nash is one of them, right? There's debates that can be had, but Morgan Plowden is absolutely in that conversation as one of the greatest female point fighters of all time. And right now, you could very well consider her the best point fighter in the game, the most dominant point fighter in the game. Male, female, doesn't matter. That's how good Morgan Plowden is. Have I said that enough? Have I made it clear how good Morgan Plowden is? But that's why she's number one on my countdown, because she was literally unstoppable at the Ocean States. When you get to the overall grand championship and you win by a spread in the overall, and it's not like it took her all of the 2 rounds to get the spread. She got the spread. It was maybe 15, 20 seconds into that second round, and she had the spread already, right? And it's not like it was a 15-5 spread or like a 17-7 spread where she scored a lot and gave up some points. No. It was 11-1. She gave up 1 point and she scored 11. That's a big deal, right? Morgan Plowden is that good. And I mean, that's all there is to say about it, right? So now we're going to switch over to a little bit of film study, courtesy of Point Fighter Live. So thank you, Point Fighter Live, for sharing the stream with us. We're going to go ahead and switch back. Actually, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the banners here. And yeah, Connor Bedard chiming in. That's a very deep list. Yeah, that list is incredibly deep. Before we do the film study, I'll give one more overview of it from 10 down to 1. And again, this is just for the Ocean States. The performances from the Ocean State Grand Nationals coming in at 10. D Stacks, 9 Enrique Latona, 8 Brandon Ballou, 7 Tahira Abdul Qadir, 6 Tyson Ray, 5 Yoscar Gomez, 4 Jack Felton, 3 Avery Plowden, 2 Elijah Everel, number 1 Morgan Plowden. Y'all, it doesn't get much better than that. It does not get much better than that. And I was on the edge of my seat all weekend long watching those point fights. And that's not even everybody. There were so many other great point fighters there, even some people that I haven't had the chance to mention yet. It was incredible. So now, because of how incredible it was, we're going to do a little bit of a film study on it. So I'm going to switch over. We're going to use this view here. And I'm going to share my screen. Bear with me for 1 second, y'all tuning in. Share screen. And let's see. We're going to do a Chrome tab. We're going to share this one right here. Boom. There it is. We're going to go full screen on it. All right. Let me make sure we're up and running. Yeah, we're looking good. Okay, perfect. So once again, thank you, Point Fighter Live, for putting this stream out there. And now we're going to watch that performance from Morgan Plowden. And again, number 7 on the countdown was Tahira Abdul Qadir. And I want you guys to see what I'm talking about. And look, Tahira right off the line right away, moving, trying to get an angle, because Morgan Plowden is so good if you allow her to stay on a straight line. And right there, notice the fighters came back to a straight line. Morgan got the best of that exchange, right? But Tahira, look at this, the footwork, the fakes, the movement. Tahira is doing the right things, and that's what allows her to score right there. She takes off on the blitz, and Morgan gives up a point, right? Again, working the angles, but Morgan, the expert she is, making the adjustment, throws the kick at the perfect time, lands it in there right on the hip, able to score 2. Scores now 3-1. Morgan working the axe kick. Tahira still keeping up the movement. She's still throwing the leg. And she's not throwing the leg to score right now. She's throwing it sometimes as a fake and other times just kind of trying to get her distance. And as she's trying to figure out the distance, Morgan has already figured out the distance and is taking advantage with the blitz right there. Morgan gets the best of that clash, it looks like. Tony Hamsani called it. Looks like he got a little bit of a timeout here. Kind of hard to tell what happened. But I think already in this match, you can see what I'm talking about. That even though this winds up being a spread, Tahira did not fight poorly. She fought Morgan well. It was just that she was fighting Morgan Plowden, right? So Tahira takes off there. You couldn't see it from this camera angle. It looks like that might have been maybe a fadeaway back fist by Morgan that scored. And Tahira again, working the angles, moving, staying a moving target for Morgan to try to keep up with. That was key for her. And then the biggest thing for Tahira was she just needed to get more offense going. She used too many of these kind of wasted kicks. There she got caught with her legs a little bit too far apart, and she was kind of stuck in the mud there. So Morgan was able to take off straight away and score. Apologize for these ads that keep popping up at the bottom here, getting in the way of the fight. And now right here, Morgan can go on cruise control, right? She's just kind of hanging out. She doesn't have to push. She's got a nice lead. She scores there, get the 2. And now this is a point in the fight where it's the first round. So Tahira doesn't, Morgan goes for the spin kick there. Tahira doesn't necessarily have to start really putting on heavy offense yet, but she's got to start thinking about it, right? It's a 2-round fight. Now there, the first round ends. And so Tahira knows going into the second round, she's going to have to lay on the gas and try to put up some points. I forget exactly what the score is at this point in the match, but Morgan has a comfortable lead. And I think at this point, Morgan's only 1 score away from having the spread. So she's either up 9 or 8, depending on if that last point was a kick or a punch. I don't recall. I would try to fast forward past this down period here, but I'm afraid that if I try to fast forward past it, I'm going to wind up skipping past Morgan's win here. So we're just going to stay here and watch the judges collaborate for a second. Let's see. We get a nice little close-up of Morgan Plowden. And it's funny, on the broadcast, we were talking, or it wasn't a broadcast because it's going to be, aired at a later date. But anyway, you know what I'm saying. We were talking about, what is Richard Plowden telling Morgan right now? And it's like, well, he really doesn't have to say much of anything, right? Morgan just has to keep doing what she's doing, stay calm like she always does. And here pretty soon, we're going to see the end of this match as Morgan's able to get the spread. After we deal with looks like a scorekeeper difficulty. And here we go. We're back to the action. Tahira again using the angles. Morgan presses forward with the kick. And with the sniper precision, able to land the kick. That's 2. So it looks like she was up 8. That gave her the 10-point lead. 11-1 win for Morgan Plowden. Simply dominant, right? And that is truly the best test of dominance. When you see a fighter that is doing a pretty good job like Tahira was, but Morgan completely being able to neutralize that is a testament to Morgan's greatness. So that's Morgan Plowden, everybody. Now we're going to fast forward to later in the show, and we are going to try, let's see, I wanted to try to catch the heavyweight final between Avery Plowden and Elijah Everel. So forgive me as I click through here real quick. Let's see. All right. By the way, as you guys are tuning in, drop those comments down below. Let me know what you guys are thinking about these matchups. Trying to see which matchup it is that we're getting right here. Forgive me for having to navigate this a little bit. All right, that's Tyson and Jack, a great fight, but we're not going to watch that fight right now because I don't have all day to be on air here. There's Avery. Let's see who Avery's going to fight. That's right. When I was talking about Tyson Ray, he also fought Jack Felton for the lightweight final. Here we go. Here's the fight that I was looking for. So this is one of the 3 matchups between Avery Plowden and Elijah Everel. This is for the heavyweight overall grand championship. And this fight, so much to love about it. Such a great chess match between the 2 of them. Now, something important to consider between the first time that Avery and Elijah fought and then the next 2 times is that in the team fighting division, Avery did suffer some type of a shoulder injury. He took a hard fall on his shoulder. It was hard to tell if it like really popped out or what exactly happened. He was in a lot of pain. He did not fight in the open weight because of that shoulder injury. So, you know, it's impossible to know if that was something that was affecting him in these matches or not. Avery's not somebody that would ever make excuses, so I would never expect him to even say anything about the potential shoulder injury that he was dealing with. But that is something to consider. So here we go, and I'm getting goosebumps watching this fight get going, just like I did when I was watching it live. And if I remember correctly, for a lot of the earlier parts of this fight, these guys have both seen each other twice already. Elijah effectively pushes the foot of Avery out of the way, but he doesn't get enough to score. And so what's interesting here is that there was potentially going to be an equipment warning. So if there's an equipment malfunction, that's a warning. If there's a second equipment malfunction, that is a penalty point to the other side. And Avery's saying, no, you can't give me an equipment warning for that because Elijah pushing my foot out of the way is what ripped my boot, and that's what created the equipment malfunction. Ultimately, that doesn't wind up being a big factor in this fight, but it was an interesting kind of stipulation of the rules there. And we have a little break in the action. Avery gets a little drink of water. And let's see what's going on here. This might have been when there was an issue with the scorekeeping. Let's see. We see Elijah getting some words of wisdom from the great Raymond Daniels, considered by many to be the greatest point fighter of all time. At the same time, Avery leaning over stage side to get some advice from who I proclaimed as the most dominant point fighter in the game right now, his sister Morgan. And at this point, I just want to see these guys get back in the action. All right, looks like we might be getting set to get back to the action. I want to take a risk here and try to fast forward, but I don't want to skip over anything. And then at this moment, I genuinely believed that Avery was going to come back and win this fight. When I saw Avery do that little dance on the side, because that's not something you typically see from Avery. You don't see Avery kind of feeling himself like that typically. So I thought that was pretty cool to see him show that kind of personality. And when I saw that, I was like, oh yeah, Avery's coming back. He gets this point on the blitz. I'm like, comeback time for Avery Plowden, right? But as great fighters do, Elijah Everel made adjustments and was able to hang on here. Let's see how he does it. So Elijah did a good job of getting Avery into that corner at times, and that's where Elijah was able to capitalize and get a lot of his points. There you see the lightning fast blitz of Elijah getting off the line again, and then it didn't look like center ref Terry Creamer said go that time, so they got to reset. And then interesting there, Elijah looked like he got to fake the back fist to the body, a little bit of his European style leaking out there because that's not a scoring technique on NASCA. Elijah goes for the jumping away defensive sidekick, Avery on the blitz. Neither of them get enough calls. Avery says, wait, didn't I get that point? Judges say, no, you didn't. That's a clash. Good call by the three judges in the back there. That's an easy clash call. That's another clash. Tony Amsani called it for Elijah. Again, good call. No call there. Elijah tries that jumping defensive sidekick again. Hard to see at this angle, but it did get in there. That jumping D side lands. Then Elijah takes off, and this is really where Elijah started to pull away. Avery knows that he's got to put some offense together, so he starts working the front hand fakes there, trying to get an opportunity. But notice that Elijah's defense there was great offense. He kept working his fakes and his leg a little bit. Avery was able to wind up getting the score in there. Looks like Avery might have gotten that defensive sidekick in, but he doesn't get the call. No call there. Elijah was just a little bit faster on that one, able to score again. Avery tries that front hand back fist to land quickly, but Elijah got there first. Both fighters take off, and they're going to get a call there, no call. And then at this point, you just see Elijah trying to keep the offense up to make sure that he kind of closed the book on this fight. And Avery trying to do everything that he could to make a comeback. And at multiple points, it looked like Avery had a chance to do it. And that would be all she wrote as Elijah, as the time expires, scores once more with that defensive kick there, another 2 points. Avery always humble in defeat, showing respect to the other fighter. And then Elijah obviously amped up. That's a big emotional moment as he wins that grand championship there, coming over to America and getting the big win. That was pretty cool for him. And since we showed that big matchup between those two titans of point fighting, as I called them in my Black Belt Magazine article, I was going to show that as the last film study. But you know what? Let's fast forward to the super fights. I'm going to show some love to Avery Plowden and his big win from the weekend, winning the Super Fights category. Also gives us a chance to watch Enrique Latona a little bit, and we will close out the show with a film study of these two guys, trying to click back just enough so that we can see the beginning of that match. Here we go. This is good enough. Click over, see if anybody's jumping in the comments. Y'all let me know if you enjoy this kind of hybrid recap film study episode. Let me know how you guys are enjoying it. This is our last film study of this episode as we watch the Super Fights final for $3,000 between Avery Plowden and Enrique Latona. Enrique fighting out of Guatemala. Richard Plowden fighting out of Detroit, Michigan. It's weird calling him Richard Plowden. I always call him by his middle name, Avery. That's what most people call him by. But his full name is Richard Avery Plowden. And we are going to fast forward a little bit here. Aha, my little 10-second fast forward button does work. Okay, now the action is underway. So Avery takes off too fast, too clean, beautiful back fist. I heard they were talking about on the Chris and Travis experience with Chris Walker, Travis Plowden, Carlos Tierney. They were talking about how when Avery lands a back fist, people feel it. Compared that to like Damon Gilbert back in the day. And it's true. Like Avery's an old school fighter and you love to see him striking with purpose like that. And to see Avery using his leg like that, that's something that you didn't used to see in a younger Avery Plowden. To see him using his leg like that to set up his offense. And then look at that. Avery fakes. Enrique bites on it, jumps way back. And we are going to get to see some of Enrique's talents coming out here. And then Enrique not able to fully extend that round kick to the body. Plowden stuffs it. Beautiful offense coming over the top as Latona goes to the ground. And this is a fight that really puts Avery's talents on display. Notice he changed his timing there. Avery's bounce got a little bit higher and slower compared to his other clashes. So he probably noticed that Enrique was maybe starting to get a hang of his timing a little bit. So he changed the pace of his bounce to try to keep Enrique off guard, and it worked well, except there Enrique takes off. Enrique's so fast, able to score with that reverse punch to the body on the blitz. Little hand fakes from Avery, Enrique biting on all of them. And then both fighters still kind of feeling each other out here. We get a nice judge leg in the way of our view here. Nice pair of blue jeans for the nighttime show. I wish that knee would get out of the way. Oh, maybe we're going to get a shot between the legs. Maybe. But we do see just enough in time to see Avery Plowden take off and score with that flurry of hand techniques over the top there. And then Enrique says, you know what, that's enough for this round as time expires. And Enrique does start to put some other combos together in round two, which we're going to see here momentarily. Some words of wisdom being spoken from Richard Plowden to son Avery. And we're going to go ahead and fast forward through the break in the action here. And I think early, before the second round started here, Enrique was dealing with a little bit of a nosebleed issue. Slowed down the fight a little bit. Not Enrique's fault. This is one of those things that happens. And again, I'm talking a lot about Avery Plowden here and, all the great things that Avery Plowden did in this fight. But Enrique is a top fighter as well. He's in the top 5 of the lightweight Black Belt Magazine rankings. And he's gotten some big wins over his career. He's a great fighter, and he's going to get more big wins. It's just in this particular instance, Avery Plowden rose to the occasion and was able to get the win. And then you see the great kick defense of Avery Plowden there and then trying to come over the top and score. But Enrique going to the ground, which, kind of makes it so that Avery can't score. And then there, Enrique is able to slip a kick in. Let's see. Did he get enough for the call? Avery was like, I don't think he had enough. Turns out he did have enough. And then look at the talent in that leg from Enrique. That big hook round over the top and then throwing in that side kick. And in this moment, the momentum shifted in Enrique's favor. With those two kicks, Enrique was getting some momentum, and then unfortunately for him, he gets this nosebleed. And, this isn't just Enrique trying to catch his breath, stuff like this. This is not, a lot of people might think that a nosebleed, that seems like kind of a petty injury, but you can't keep fighting if there's blood dripping onto the mat. So Enrique didn't have a choice here. I mean, the fight had to be stopped. They had to get this taken care of. I was on stage after this to take some team photos with Paul Mitchell and everything, and there was a big glob of blood still on the mat that had come from Enrique's nose. So it's not like Enrique just had to blow his nose or something. This was not some petty thing. Enrique genuinely had to get this seen about, and Enrique would not have wanted this to happen, not just because he doesn't want a nosebleed. The momentum had just shifted in his favor. He had just landed those back-to-back kicks. That's a 4-point swing, and the momentum was shifting towards him. And then all of a sudden the fight has to stop. There's this big break in the action. I heard some people kind of talking like, he didn't need that timeout or whatever. But this is not Enrique's fault. Enrique wanted that fight to keep going because, things were starting to go his way. And then Avery, being the pro that he is, takes advantage of it. Says, okay, there's a little break in the action. Now I'm going to start to push some offense a little bit. Enrique circles out of bounds there. And then Avery gets a point on the out of bounds rule. Now, actually, I'm going to rewind this because I want to talk a little bit about the out of bounds rule because we saw this multiple times over the course of the weekend. And I'm not sure that I'm a big fan of the way that it's being called. Now, the one thing that I appreciate is that in any division that I saw Terry Creamer being the center referee, he officiated it consistently. This type of an exit, he called a penalty point for being out of bounds every single time that it happened. And so I give big kudos to him for being consistent because with this type of a rule, consistency from a center referee is really, really important for the fighters to understand the expectations. However, what was consistently called over the course of the weekend was if a fighter was in kind of a normal circling motion, what I'm going to call a maneuver common to the game of point fighting, and they would step out, that was a penalty point. I don't personally feel like that should be a penalty point. I feel like the way that the rule was written and the spirit of the rule is that if a fighter is actively avoiding contact, meaning a leg is being pumped at them, for example, and they back up, and back out of bounds to get away from an active attack by the other fighter, meaning they are actively avoiding the fight, that does deserve a penalty point. But if you're doing a move common to the game, if you're just circling around the outside and one foot goes a little bit out of bounds, especially on stage, to me, that's not something that's worth a penalty point. Maybe at least a warning before a penalty point. But to me, if somebody is circling, and I'm gonna go ahead and restart this so you guys can see it. And in fact, I'm going to go ahead and play it in slow motion here so that we can see what actually happened. And keep in mind, the judges don't have the benefit of seeing this in slow motion, right? So Avery turns on the offense with a kick. Watch Enrique's feet. Enrique circles, 1 foot steps out there, and Enrique goes out. Now, in this case, when you watch it in slow motion, as we will watch it in slow motion again here, Avery was on the attack. So this is one of those that I feel like could have gone either way. But when I watched it in slow-mo, Avery was on the attack. So there's Avery's initial attack. Avery attacks again right here, and Enrique moves out of the way. Now, what's tricky about this is that by the time Enrique moves out of the way, Avery's foot has already gone back down, and the active attack is kind of ended, which is where some of the subjectivity of this rule kind of comes into play, which again, anytime that a rule is subjective, that's not the best thing in the world. But see, that's 1 foot going out. You know what I mean? So Avery is correct to call this. I'm not saying that this should not have been called because this is the way that it was called all weekend. Avery recognized it, said, hey, look, that's an exit. The judges said, absolutely, we agree. His foot went out. That's an exit. That's 1 point Avery's way. So I'm not saying that Avery should not have gotten this point. I'm saying that rule probably needs another look because I feel like there were a lot of situations where a fighter was just circling a move common to the game. They were not avoiding an active clash, and they were called for going out of bounds. And it was consistent the whole weekend, which is a good thing, but is the rule, it leaves a lot of subjectivity in play, which I'm never going to be a big fan of when there's a lot of subjectivity. Again, as I watch that one in slow-mo, I start to think more and more that, yeah, Enrique was in a corner. He had to go that direction to get out of the way, and he was avoiding the fight when the foot stepped out. So I do start to see that call better in slow motion. But there were other calls over the course of the weekend where a fighter was really just circling and got called on that. Back to the fight. We see beautiful kick defense by Avery there. Avery tries the back fist, doesn't quite get it, explodes on the blitz, gets that one. And then again, Avery, beautiful with the patience, that strong guard up in front for the kick defense. And up against a great kicker, that's what you have to do. If you neutralize Enrique's kicks, you're going to have a pretty good chance of beating him. And that's what Avery did. Avery effectively neutralized Enrique's kicks. Enrique, being a great kicker, was still able to get a few in on him. But by and large, Avery shut down Enrique's kicks, and that's what enabled him to get this win. And I feel like that's kind of the next stage of Enrique's development as a fighter. The next stage of Enrique's development, he's already got a fast blitz. You just got to use it more, start setting it up better. You don't see Enrique using a whole lot of blitz setups. He kind of uses his kicking to set up his blitz when he throws it. Reminds me of a lot of the time the way that Zolt would set up his blitzes, because Zolt had a nice blitz, but he would pretty much exclusively use his kicking to set up his blitz. And then later in Zolt's career, he started using regular hand fakes to set up his blitz, and that made him a much more effective fighter. And then there we see a big embrace between Avery and Enrique as Avery wins the Super Fights title. But I do feel like Enrique is going to be able to make that step, start setting up his hands more, improve his defense a little bit. But in this case, Avery, too big, too strong, too experienced, too good. And Avery winds up getting the Super Fights title. So, ladies and gentlemen, what a show it has been. That brings us all the way. You can see my reflection in the window now. We have gone all the way into the nighttime here with this show. So there was my top 10 of the best point fighting performances at the Ocean State Grand Nationals. Shout out to Morgan Plowden for being as dominant as she was. Shout out to Elijah Everel and Avery Plowden for a budding rivalry that is going to be a ton of fun to watch. I cannot wait for the Battle of Atlanta. I hope that we see just a fraction of these great fighters there, but it's the Battle of Atlanta, so we know that we're going to see most of them, if not all of them. Plus, we expect Bailey Murphy to be back in the mix at Battle of Atlanta, so that's going to be a lot of fun. So a very point-fighting heavy show for tonight. I hope you guys enjoyed the film study. Let me know what parts of the show you guys enjoyed the most. And I must not forget the hashtag JRP Challenge. This week's hashtag JRP Challenge, I'm not going to make you guys do a top 10, but give me a top 3. Down in the comments below, give me your top 3 favorite overall performances from the Ocean State Grand Nationals. It doesn't have to be point fighting. It can be all point fighting. It can be all forms and weapons. It can be a hybrid of the two. But for the hashtag JRP Challenge, give me in the comments of this live stream, of this episode, your top 3 performances from the Ocean State Grand Nationals. If you weren't there, what did you see on stream? What did you see on video? What were your top 3 performances in your opinion? And I might share some of those opinions on the show next week. I can't reveal it just yet because everything's not set in stone, but we do have potentially a very exciting guest coming on the show next week. So hopefully we can make that happen. So you guys stay tuned for some more news and updates and announcements about that. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Once again, if you love sport karate, if you love the Jackson Rudolph podcast, make sure you hit that share button. Make sure that everybody in your family sees this episode, especially if they love point fighting, because we did a ton of point fighting in this episode. One more time, I'm Jackson Rudolph. Thank you, Black Belt Magazine, for hosting the Jackson Rudolph podcast. This has been episode 95, and I'll see you next time.